Okay, this is where we are in the Amida Sutra. We were talking about the corruptions of the world, and that brought us to the timidity of mundane beings. And that led us to talking about the 10 precepts. Because in this stability of mundane beings, the core of is the lack of good roots and the lack of morality. And so it makes sense for us to talk about the basis of morality, and that is the 10 precepts. 十善业, right? 十天業, 10天業. We will now talk about the 6th precept, abstention from frivolous speech, or practice of meaningful speech. So these are the complete observance of this precept. One is to avoid frivolous, meaningless speech. The other one is to practice meaningful speech. So the Buddha listed 32 kinds of frivolous, idle, useless, meaningless talk that the disciples should not indulge. We will understand why that is and the impact of indulging in frivolous speech. I think we can clearly see now that with the proliferation of the media, right, the radio, television, the press, magazines that we see have all kinds of such meaningless speech. And therefore, it is more relevant today that we observe this speech. Therefore, we should not lose sight of this principle. The principle of abstention from frivolous speech, and the positive counterpart of it is meaningful speech. It is no longer that the big and powerful organizations that can publish their views. The internet has leveled the playing field and has opened the communication media down to the individual level. Anybody can publish their views. Anybody can go onto the internet and publish their views. And not only that, it's worldwide, right? Once you put something on the internet, it's worldwide and anybody can see it. You can reach anybody across the globe. And even to now where, like, I think Amazon or other services can provide publishing of your books, your works in book form for very low cost. So the avenues of communication has opened up, and it makes it very affordable for people to publish their views, whether wrong or right. Anybody can publish anything. I think in the history of this world, we have never witnessed such an astonishing amount of data generated. You can see people generate data on the internet at an astounding rate, right? People consume data also at an astounding rate too. They consume data to satisfy some hunger, and sometimes, even most of the times, there's not even time for them to digest what is it that they're consuming. That you go on the internet and you just browse videos after videos. You see videos, you consume data. It's almost without any time to digest. It's almost like force feeding your craving, or you force feed something without time to digest. And what's going to happen is you will have indigestion. There's no time to digest the information. So the analogy of such indigestion is what? Emotional indigestion. Emotional indigestions will lead to worries, anxieties, or anger. You read something in the news, and without fully understanding it, you get upset, for example, or you get even elated, happy. And you don't know why, and you get emotionally wrapped up. So that's emotional indigestion. Consumptions of mindless entertainment watching a whole bunch of videos on the internet just to kill time is dangerous, because it leads to indigestion, emotional indigestion, because so much information and you don't have time to absorb, to understand what it means. So that's today. But if you look at 100 years ago, it was not that simple. To publish a book was not simple. For example, this is how it was in the past. For people to print, they would have to they have to do the cutting, the laminating, and the binding and sewing of the books, right? They have to print it, they cut it, and they have to laminate it, and they have to sew it. It was not easy to publish a book. And so they had to choose very carefully, right? The words that they chose to put on the book had to be very carefully thought out. And the words, therefore, a lot of meanings were packed in the words. We can see this in the Chinese traditions or even in Vietnamese traditions. Every word written down was carefully thought about, and it was packed with meanings. And so when they printed out books, it was very precious. They could not afford to print out a lot. And therefore, they had to be very selective in the words that they wanted to print. And this was what, 1990? This was how they printed books. But nowadays, mass production of books, right? You could print out books at very low cost, and even you can publish your virtual books on the internet without any cost at all. And because of this mass production, that things are very cheap. Anything with mass production, right? Things are very cheap because you produce in a large quantity. So it's very cheap. They have very little value. Because of little value, that it could be misinformation. Because people just, they could, whatever they thought of, they published. And therefore it was not very valuable. So without very little value and it's widely distributed, then it can be misleading, therefore misinformation, right? And so that's how it was before. Was the text were more accurate, but nowadays the information that we receive on the internet is not so reliable, so we have to be careful about that. Speech can be truly meaningful only when life is meaningful. So do you feel life to be meaningful for you? Right? We should surround ourselves with meaningful speech, positive speech, very uplifting speech, and that helps us to see the beauty of life, and that helps us to see the meaningfulness of life. So we surround ourselves with meaningless entertainment, meaningless information. We can easily be overloaded, and that will lead to mental and physical exhaustion. We get all wrapped up. The things that we read on the internet, we get all emotionally wrapped up. So whenever we say we should have a goal in why we say things, a definite purpose and a definite goal in our speech. And that helps to tune ourselves on the path towards enlightenment. Because as Buddhists, our common goal is enlightenment. And meaningful speech is speech about the Dharma. Now, I'm not talking about the text in the Buddhist books, but Dharma here is the truth. We should speak the truth. And Dharma here is collective designations for all those doctrines, methods, insights, and observances that can actually help us in the directions of transcendental, towards enlightenment. Right? The things that we say should help us to be in towards that direction. Because if you're heading in this direction, you want to go into this direction, but you're heading in a different direction, then you're not going to get there. Right? We want to get to San Francisco, but we're driving south. that will not us get to the north, right? So when we speak, we speak something that's different from our goal, then we're not going to get to our goal. We should be one being walking towards the same direction. Our emotional energies, our view, how we treat people should be towards the goal of enlightenment. And that will help to speed up the process too. So Dharma here is not just to blurb out the text in the books, but to talk about things that are meaningful, that can help us towards the goal of enlightenment. So how do we know what Dharma is when we speak? Well, Dharma here, when we speak something, it should help to refine our individuality, to make us become individuals and not individualistic. That's the difference. Being individual is to know who we are, to know what we want, and to be responsible for our life, our being. Individualistic is egoistic. You're being selfish. So being individualistic is being selfish. That's different from being an individual. The terms, we're playing with terms here, but Dharma is supposed to make us less selfish and more individual, meaning more that we know what we want. We don't go with the flow just because everybody does so. We go with the flow because we know that is our goal, right? We do things with specific and definite purpose and goal, right? We don't do things just because, but we do things, we say things because it helps us to uncover our wisdom, right? Because it helps us to move towards the goal of enlightenment. So true individual development comprises an other regarding and self-regarding aspect. So helping others and helping ourselves. So meaningful speech here is not speech about the Dharma in a merely formal sense. So it's not just about blurbing out the text in the sutra, the words in the sutra, but it should be meaningful. So we don't have to talk about the Dharma all the time, the Buddhist text all the time, but we should talk behind the words that we say should resonate with enlightenment, should have some meanings with enlightenment. Right? It has meaning that it should be meaningful. Right? The things that we say should be meaningful, and it should help us to develop, to make us become individuals. So individual here is that you make a conscious effort. So you do things, you say things not because everybody else does so, but you are making a conscious effort. You know, you're aware. You're making a conscious effort to do things, to say those things, to say the right things, to say meaningful things. Right? And you maintain your awareness and your intentions in your deeds. So your goal is very definite and very specific. And your speech should help you to get there. Your deeds should help you to get there. Right? 我们的行为, right? hành vi, tư tưởng, lời nói, và hành động. Hành động. Yeah, all those three things, our deeds, our words, our thoughts, should be towards the goal of enlightenment. So it helps to have this communication, this in-depth communication between people who are committed to the ideal of enlightenment. We should surround ourselves by those who have this goal, and we should communicate in such a way that helps us to help us and those who are interested towards the goal of enlightenment. Right? So you can see that speech here is very important. Right? Speech plays an important role in that path towards enlightenment, such as the Eightfold Path, Bát Chánh Đạo, Bát Chánh Đạo, Bát Chánh Đạo. So you, with Eightfold Path, you start with right view, and meaning you have you understand things very properly. And then what follows is merit cultivation. And that merit cultivation consists of right speech, right karma, and right livelihood. Right speech is say meaningful things. Right karma is to do the proper things. And right livelihood is to have a proper career, to do your earnings should be proper. So when you have merits, phước báo, right? Phú báo. When you have merits, your life will become better and you will be able to resolve problems. And when you can resolve problems and not try to run away from problems, it makes it easier to enter meditation. Just like we just talked about, when we have fulfilled our responsibility and we've done the best we can and we have done nothing wrong, when you sit in meditation, you will feel at ease, right? Nothing to worry about. Otherwise, you'll be sitting there, your body is still, but your mind is disturbed. Therefore, it is so important that we practice the Eightfold Path. And practicing the Eightfold Path requires right speech. And this brings us back to this precept number 6, no frivolous speech, right? No meaningless speech. It helps us to cultivate merits, and that helps us to get closer to our goal of enlightenment. So can you see the connection, right? The speech, in our speech, should have merits behind it, right? Mỗi lời nói, mỗi câu mình nói, sau đó ngoài sau đó phải có phải sản sanh cái phước báo. Phước, phải có phước. Mỗi cái lời nói mình phải có phước. Yeah. Everything that we say should generate merit. Otherwise, we will not be able to walk towards our goal of enlightenment. Mỗi lời nói của mình, ngoài sau đó phải tạo phước, sản sanh phước. And that helps us to see reality when we have meditation, meaning we avoid meaning that we don't allow ourselves to be disturbed by external factors or even internal factors. We can see things clearly and we can see reality. When we see reality here, what I mean by that is that you understand conditionality. When we see conditionality, we see why things happen. And if we understand why things happen, then there is no fuss about it. There's no anger. Why we should be angry? For example, let's say you have a toothache and you go to a dentist, or the dentist is going to remove that bad tooth. It's going to be painful, but you don't get angry because you understand why the pain exists. Therefore, you don't get angry. So when you see conditionality, you see the reasons why things happen. And therefore, you don't have to endure the pain with aggravation. You endure the pain because you know it's good for you and you know it will bring good results, right? So when things happen to us unfavorably, people scold at us, angry people coming towards us, but we don't take revenge. We don't get angry, but we understand why things happen. We will try to resolve that situation. We will work with other people to resolve why is it that they're angry. And we maybe we will never be able to resolve it, but in our heart, we don't have anger. Does it make sense? So that's why the Eightfold Path here is to help us, to remind us that we have to cultivate merits. Cultivate merits, but also cultivate wisdom. And the path is precepts, meditations, and wisdom, right? Threefold path. Tam học, giới, định, tuệ. Chia, tinh, huệ, san, xuệ. Tam học, giới, định, tuệ. So threefold study precepts or morality, meditation, and wisdom. And the whole purpose of achieving enlightenment, wisdom, is to help others. Right? So it goes in a very virtuous cycle. When we can help other people, it helps us to reinforce our right view, and that helps in the process automatically. That is merit cultivation. Right? So you can see the virtuous cycle, Deng Huang. Right? The cycle, you help other people in a meaningful way, that will help you to reinforce your right view, and in return, you're cultivating merit, and your meditation will be deepened, and therefore you will continue to do the right things even more. So when we have enlightenment, enlightenment here means no delusion, no misunderstanding. So in our speech, if we avoid meaningless speech, we avoid misinformation, then therefore we will avoid misunderstanding, right? So again, the purpose of observing the speech precepts is not just mere abstention, meaning just don't do this, don't do that, but to generate merits, right, for enlightenment. So we have to remind that we're observing this merit not just because we are restricting ourselves to not do things, to not say things, but to generate merits. So we have to say the right things. It's not only avoiding saying meaningless things, but we have to practice to say meaningful things to generate merits. So when we observe this precept and we are engaged in meaningful speech, and we avoid frivolous speech, it doesn't mean that we drag in the subject of Buddhism on each and every occasion. We just don't bring out Buddhism every time we talk about the truth or the meaningful to other people. That's not what it's about. So when we study Buddhism, we just don't become the karma police. We don't become the police to judge people by the rule of our ethics, right? Oh, you're doing bad things, you're going to go to hell. We don't say that. We don't become police and judge people, right? We don't threaten people with karmic consequences. You don't do this, you're going to go to hell. That's not why we study Buddhism. And that should not be why we talk about the Dharma, to threaten people. But we want to be helpful, to be value added, right? Giving people what they need. But when we give people what they need, it has to be skillful. Yeah, it has to be skillful. It has to be good. For example, you see two people arguing, and you want to be helpful, and they're about to engage in a fight. You're trying to be helpful, so you give each person a stick. Right? That's just going to increase the conflict. So your helpfulness should be skillful, right? You want to settle the conflict and not to escalate it. So if you don't try to be skillful, then your action could hurt both parties, right? When we practice meaningful speech and we try to be helpful, and sometimes people become irrational. They don't want our help. And that's fine. It's irrational to expect people to be rational. Right? It's irrational to expect people to be irrational. Why is that? Majority of people are not individuals. They don't know what they want. They don't know who they are. And some people enter a midlife crisis because they've lived half of their lives and they lost the meaning of their lives. So they don't know what they are. They don't know what they want. So we shouldn't expect people to be everybody to be individual. And we should not expect them to be rational, because that's why they are not individuals, because they're not rational. So this is not meant to be condescending and not to talk down on them, right? But it's an aspect of human nature. People, if they are mundane beings, 凡夫, if they're mundane beings, then they most of the times they don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. So here's a teaching from Milarepa. Milarepa was a Tibetan guru, yogi, enlightened yogi. And he said, this is one of his lessons. He teaches that it is not reasonable to expect people to be reasonable. And that's where conflict is. If you expect people to be reasonable, then there will be conflict because you yourself are not being reasonable, right? If you expect people to be reasonable, then you yourself are not reasonable. If this upsets you, and if it upsets you, then you are being unreasonable. Because you should expect that it is what it is. Why are you upset? If you know that by human nature, mundane beings, they are unreasonable, why are you getting upset? Just like a baby, baby cries all the time. Why are you upset that the baby's crying? It's natural for babies to cry. We should try to understand why the baby's crying as opposed to getting upset, right? So when we deal with people and we become and we get upset, then we are being unreasonable. So that's what he's saying, that even when people try to be rational, they can be irrational, and because that's human nature. And people will react emotionally. And what do we expect? People will react emotionally because they are unreasonable. So why should we be hurt by that? Why should we be taken aback? We shouldn't be surprised that people are unreasonable, right? And they're irrational. So when we understand that, we need to put up with each other's unreasonableness from time to time, right? We should expect people to be reasonable and find a way to resolve it, as opposed to be defensive, and then we become unreasonable with their unreasonableness. Because if we don't understand this, then disagreements will occur. We should not expect the world to be free of conflict. Right? We should not expect the world to be free of conflicts. But we should equip ourselves with the ability to solve conflicts. Right? We don't run away. We don't run away from unreasonable people or get upset with unreasonable people, but to find a way to resolve that unreasonableness. So for an example, let's say commitment. We're in a community, spiritual group, and we have commitment towards enlightenment. There will be people who approach their commitment from a different angle, right? They see commitment differently from other people, even from us. Usually a problem arises is because there is misunderstanding. And it comes down to different temperaments, different attitude, right? Different perspective, different ways of seeing. And so we should not expect other people to behave and to see the same thing. For example, extrovert temperament, people who are always looking on the outside. Extroverts are those who get their energy from the outside, interacting with people. Extroverts, they see commitments in terms of like structure and organization. They want everything to be in order. There are people who say, okay, you need to go to class, you need to have certain time meditating, you have to follow a certain schedule. That's to them, like, that's commitment, right? But then some other people who say, not necessarily, you just go out, you deal with people, and you can maintain your goal and awareness. Sometimes you're busy, you cannot follow that schedule. You can still have your commitment. And both are correct, right? They're correct in their own ways. You cannot expect a person who doesn't believe in a strict following of a schedule to have specific schedule. So when we see that people who are not following a schedule, like for example, like we do, for example, if we have a schedule and they're not following the schedule, we cannot say they don't have commitment, right? or a person to say, oh, he just sits there all day. He doesn't. That's not real commitment. He's being lazy. So they have different perspectives, and therefore we should have that understanding to avoid a conflict. How do we avoid conflict? Well, we should focus on the commonality. He has his own approach. I have my own approach. Other people have their own ways of cultivating. But we have the same goal, is commitment towards enlightenment. So that, based on that, it allows us to accept other people. They have their own ways of doing things, but we have the same goal, right? So we should focus on something that is common between parties so that we can avoid conflicts. So we should put aside differences, right? Focus on commonality, and that is the commitment for the greater good. And that allows us to avoid conflicts. So that's the lessons, is that it's irrational for us to expect other people to be reasonable. Okay. So when we talk about the Dharma and we want to talk about meaningful speech, it doesn't necessarily mean that we always talk about enlightenment, talking about suffering, right? But we want to be more helpful. We want to do things that are meaningful to help others right now. And we don't have to drag on this topic of Buddhism on and on and on, right? But we should understand that behind our speech is something that's meaningful and something that can help us towards the goal of enlightenment, and not necessarily about Buddhism all the time. If one is oneself committed to the ideal of enlightenment, then naturally one will speak in that term, in the terms of enlightenment, meaning that your thinking will be towards the goal of enlightenment. You might not use Buddhist terms, but your intentions, your meaning will have that influence, will have that atmosphere, will have that energy of enlightenment. Does it make sense? So you will have that intention behind it. Because whatever that you truly believe deep inside will be expressed through your words, right? And so without using Buddhist words, the spirit of your words will still be Buddhist, will still be Buddhistic. Does it make sense? If we are constantly aware of our commitment, and we're constantly aware of our directions, then in our conversation, it will come out naturally. We will express our ideas, our thinking in words with that have the spirit of enlightenment, of the Dharma. For example, you're at work and you have a new college hire as your co-worker, and that new college hire co-worker is not happy about his job, for example, and he comes and complains to you. He says, I'm frustrated about this organization, this company. Things are not moving fast enough. I want to make a big impact. I want to become a VP, a vice president, to make a big impact. And then so you ask your young co-worker, how long have you been working here? Well, I've been here for 6 months. So you say, okay, you just graduated, you've been with the company for 6 months, and you want to become a VP, maybe you should give it a little more time. And you can help him to see things in a different perspective. And even without using Buddhist words, you can say, okay, well, your job that you're working, you may think that is not very interesting. But if you look at a jigsaw puzzle, they're all puzzle pieces already put together. Even though a piece of puzzle is very dark and not very colorful, but it's still important. Because without that peace, the puzzle would not be complete, right? So the task that you're working on, it may not be very interesting, but it is important. Because if you don't do your job right, and we made mistake, then in the future, the customer could come back and put a claim, and we have to pay more money to fix the problem, right? So we're not using Buddhist words, but we're communicating Buddhism to them, like to fulfill your responsibility, do it right. And that piece, a dark looking piece, will make the picture beautiful, will make the puzzle, the picture complete, right? So if you don't do your job, then the picture, the organization is not complete. So that piece may not be very interesting, but it is very important, right? So the work that you do is very important. So when we say things like that, we are not using the Buddhist terms, but we are communicating Buddhism, right? So when it is in our heart, when we have the attitude of, cultivating merits and fulfilling our responsibility, when it is ingrained in us, it comes out very naturally, right? So that's what we want, is to have this natural spirit of enlightenment in our conversation without carrying on Buddhist terms on and on and on, right? And it's important that we have this intention, this awareness of our goal, because if we don't, then we can bring ourselves trouble when we practice Buddhism. So let's take an example. Even if you are fighting in the name of Buddhism, you may not be a Buddhist, a true Buddhist, and you were likely to succumb to the traps of desire. Let's give an example. So then the next lessons that Milarepa gave was the 3 kingdoms and 6 realms. 3 kingdoms is Tam Giới, San Jie. And 6 realms are Lục Đạo, Liu Dao. So San Jie, Liu Dao. The 3 kingdoms and 6 realms are jeopardized by desires, forever leading sentient beings into danger. So if we don't have awareness of a goal of enlightenment, the things that we do, we are jeopardizing ourselves and leading ourselves into danger. Because the whole of conditioned existence, everybody in this luân everybody in this cycle of life and death, even in its most pure and elevated aspects, is subject to the danger of desire. So the desire, tham luyến, than xin, that desire is ingrained in us, and if we don't have awareness, we are subject to the danger of desire. For example, if you use Buddhism and want to overcome your opponents in a debate, then there is danger in that, because your mindfulness will evaporate because you want to be right. You're becoming the karma police, or you're becoming the dharma police even, and to try to prove that you are right and others are wrong. And making the dharma the occasion for your mindfulness, you are making the route to liberation yet another mundane trap. So even if we are saying we're heading towards enlightenment, but we are falling to a trap, another trap. And that trap is the egoistic trap, become arrogant. And so we are creating another trap for ourselves. There is nothing more dangerous than pseudo-dharma. And because you cling to your idea of right view. You think that your view is fixed, your great ideas are fixed and the best. And so you're making a fundamental mistake, even though you're fighting and winning, fighting for and winning others for the sake of the Dharma. So the downfall of egoism in disguise is that we will create another trap for ourselves. Here's a specific example. There was a monk called Great Wisdom, but at that time he was not a monk. He was a librarian, but he was once a monk. And when he was a monk, he was best known of all the Theravada Buddhist monks in Nepal, a city in India. And he was best known of all the reformists. And he was a Thera, which is an elder monk. He had completed 10 years as a member of the monastic order. So he was a monk. He had been a monk for 10 years. And he had many disciples, many students with him. And he traveled from Ceylon to Burma, right? From Ceylon, another area, another country, another city in India to Burma. And he practiced meditation. He was highly accomplished. He was a popular teacher in Newar. Newar was another community in India, very civilized community in India. And he was fluent in Hindi, Nepali, and Sinhalese. So he was very educated, very well educated. And above all, he was fearless opponent of the caste system, right? You understand the caste system, where the poor people at the bottom and then the rich and powerful people on the top. And so he was a fearless opponent of the caste system. But one day he was traveling to Newar, to a vihara, Densa, Jingse, temple essentially. Okay? So he was traveling to Damodaya Vihara, and on the opening of that vihara, and he was invited to come and stay there. Unfortunately, when he arrived, shortly after that, he became ill and he was confined to bed. The Newars naturally looked after him, or rather the Newar women looked after him. But there was a widow who was very assiduous in her attentions, right? He took care of her he took her very carefully. And the visiting monk, she took care of him daily at his bedside, doing everything that she could to help him to recover from his illness. So one day, a group of Newars came to see him, and out of respect, they removed their shoes and they walked up the stairs carefully, not to make any sounds, to avoid disturbing the monk. But then, on opening the door, they found the Great Wisdom and the widow locked in embrace. So as a result of that, he was forced to leave Vihara. So they were doing things that were not very appropriate. So now that he was no longer a monk, but because in considerations of his past services in Buddhism, that he was appointed as a librarian. And so when later on, it was the author understood a little bit more why this monk was against the caste system, because the caste system was injustice. So what happened was that in another vihara, there were other poor people coming in to study and to utilize that vihara. But he got upset with them when they came in, and when the vihara was being used by non-Newars, people were not of his people, and particularly by low caste people from the bazaar, the city. And because they were low-ranking Nepali Hindus caste, they were at the bottom of the caste system, at the bottom of society, right? So as a monk, though, he opposed the caste system, but he opposed it only to the extent that it discriminated against Newards, against his own people. But when it came to other people, he didn't care. He discriminated against them. So even though he was using the Dharma to fight for justice, but it was with selfish intention. So there was some desire in him to, although it was still good that he wanted to protect his own people, but he was using the Dharma in a selfish way. And so he got into trouble, having sexual misconduct with another woman, and because he fell into another trap of his own, the trap of desire, right? So the story, of the stories I've read, the monks ended up marrying the women that they were involved with romantically after they had left, meaning they were no longer monks. But they were not sexually abusive. At least that was the good part, was they want to have a relationship, that's fine. So they were good Buddhists, but bad monks. They were still good Buddhists. So we should be aware of our ego in disguise in our deeds. So when we trying to fight for something, when we think that's righteous, we should be aware that it could be our ego pushing us to fight for righteousness. And if we are not aware of that, there's hidden desire that we will fall into a trap of fame, trap of money and wealth, trap of romantic relationships, or trap of improper romantic relationships. So those traps are waiting for us. And if we are fighting in the spirit of pseudo-dharma, pseudo meaning fake dharma, then we are setting traps for ourselves, right? So we should be aware that even though when we say meaningful things, it should be with true intention and not because of our egoistic agenda. So that's why it's saying here that we should be constantly aware of the directions in which the conversation is moving, and not allow the ego to be in disguise and to say, I'm fighting for righteousness, but in actuality, you could be fighting for your own ego, right? So we should maintain awareness and slowly develop the Dharma eye, right? Pháp nhãn. The Dharma eye helps us to see conditionality, helps us to see the potential for change, helps us to see the traps set before us, and helps us to avoid expecting people to be reasonable, because if we expect them to be reasonable, then we are unreasonable. And we should not be upset because we see things very clearly, why things happen, right? We should not be upset. So frivolous speech is liable to erupt when people come together. It's likely for them, to tarnish meaningful speech, to turn meaningful speech into something that is meaningless. So whenever that abundant, like mass production, the internet, the communication is so abundant that it loses its value, it loses its meaning, and becomes misinformation. So why is there misinformation? And why do people fall for it? And who falls for misinformation? So the purpose of misinformation or fake news it is designed to trigger people psychologically, their emotions, and influence people's opinion, knowledge, and emotion in a certain direction. Right? They want people to behave in a certain direction because they want public opinion to shift in a certain direction. That's why they distribute misinformation to influence you. But who falls for misinformation? According to Time magazine, propagandists, those who distribute misinformation, they use computer algorithms, they use computers to sort through vast amounts of public data that people express themselves on Twitter, Facebook, or Reddit, or Google. Right? Whenever you use computer, you leave your information behind. And they gather all that information and they generate messages and they send out. And either into your email inbox or to your web browser, the messages that pop up. And when you read those messages, and usually those messages contain hot button issues that people will emotionally triggered. And so they take those responses, whoever responds to those messages, they'll take the responses and they group them into subgroups, thousands of subgroups with defined characteristics like religion, political beliefs, right? Your opinions. They take the beliefs that you hold into multiple groups. And now they're trying to narrow down who you are. What is it that you like? What is it that will push your button, right? So they target you and they target you and see what you like, what you click on, and whether you are sympathetic or not to the topic. So they know what is it that will make you respond. And then they determine who they can influence and who they can manipulate in order to alter, to change the public opinion, through fear and confusion. So those who respond to those messages, they know, these are potential targets that I can influence. So those who respond are likely candidates, or likely targets. So they try to get to your emotions. They try to get you to act on it. And the more that you respond, the more that they will continue to feed you messages and then get you all emotionally stirred up, right? So if you are emotionally stirred up after reading or viewing a message, then you may have been influenced by fake news, by misinformation. So we should be careful after we have read something, we are emotionally stirred up. Are we angry now? It's like, how dare is this candidate or this issue is taking place? We should do something about it. Well, be careful. You may have been misinformed, right? So you ask yourself, are you sure you want to share this message, right? Before we forward a message to a big distribution, are we sure that this is accurate? And are we sure that we're not, sending misinformation, right? Proliferate misinformation to others, because you could end up distributing misinformation. You could be the one who is sending misinformation, fake news, right? So that was another study to look at how this comes about. What is this fake news and why do people send out things? There's a publication called On the Origin, Proliferation, and Tone of Fake News. With a group at the University of Albany in New York who did this. They said that they had three conclusions. The first one was that fake news is not published on popular websites. Rather, they are published by lesser known media outlets or websites. So those you can call major, legitimate websites, they are less likely to publish fake news. So the information that we consume should come from reliable sources, right? Known, reliable sources. Don't just click on anything that seems interesting, or YouTube videos that seem interesting. So those headlines, those titles are designed to trigger your emotions. The second thing that they found was that fake news are proliferated more by unverified users compared to verified users. So when you see a post on the internet and people respond to it and like a Twitter and it becomes viral, they could proliferate, make the fake news even more. They distribute fake news even more. So the third thing that they found was that fake news stories are written in a specific linguistic tone, either negative, positive, or neutral. So there's directions that they want you to lean forward towards. Design of fake news is to trigger your emotions in a certain direction, right? So after you have read fake news and you become emotionally disturbed, after you read something and you become emotionally disturbed, be careful that you may have been influenced by fake news. There was a study of 3,000 people, and they found that 75% of the people fell for fake news. So there was a study, they designed that fake news, and they sent out to 3,000 people, and 75% of them thought it was real. 75% of them thought that it was real. So misinformation has a big impact on people's lives and society. Right? After we read fake news and we get emotionally disturbed, we could negatively influence our family. Right? We become angry, and that could set a very negative atmosphere. And if people don't verify and they distribute fake news, that could impact public opinion and society, right? So the reasons that people are more susceptible to fake news, meaning that they believe in fake news, is because one, people tend to read only the headlines, and I think that's the whole story. And sometimes the headline is written in such a way to trigger emotion, but the content, sometimes the contents have nothing to do with the headlines. Or they'll put something very negative, but then it's not that bad, right? Or like, for example, the economy is going to crash, recession is going to occur. So things to trigger your emotions, but in the content, they'll say, well, we're not sure, it could happen, it could not happen, because nobody can tell the future. So we should be very careful. Don't just react when reading the headlines, but try to understand the whole story. And people like to read the headlines because it's fast, and they don't have time to sit down and read the whole story. They want instant gratification. They want answer right away, right? You want to read the headline to satisfy your curiosity, but you don't want to invest the time to understand the whole story. And so therefore, you react to the headline. And of course, those people want you to click on their site, click on their messages, read their messages, read the headlines, see the videos, right? So the headlines are designed to trigger your emotions. And the third thing that people believe are susceptible to fake news is because they believe that whatever is popular has to be the truth, right? So it's not just because everybody is talking about it, it doesn't mean that it's the truth. And we learned this from the Kalama Sutra. In the sutra, the Buddha said to the people in the town Kalama, say, don't believe in authority, don't believe in tradition, don't believe in something that's popular. Just because everybody talks about it, just because it has been in your family, in your traditions for generations, it doesn't mean that's right. For example, animal sacrifice, right? They kill animals every certain time of the year to make offerings to the god. So that was tradition from generation to generation. But that doesn't make it right. So the Buddha said that's not right. And so just because somebody in high position saying this is the way it is, it doesn't make it right, right? So the Buddha is saying don't trust authority. Don't think it's the truth because it comes from authority, it comes from traditions or popularity. Okay? So we should understand this precept not just on the surface, not just to refrain from meaningless speech, but we should practice meaningful speech. And we should understand the purpose of this precept number 6 is to avoid confusion and meaningless communication. Right? That's the whole thing about precept number 6, is to avoid confusion and to avoid meaningless communication. Because these precepts are about communication, right? These 4 precepts are speech precepts, the verbal precepts. So they are really about communication. And it should not only be limited to oral communication, but it is also applicable to written form of communication, right? The things that we put on the internet, the things that we forward in emails to others should avoid confusion, should avoid meaningless communication. Does it make sense? So that's precept number 6. Precept number 7 is abstention from slanderous speech or harmonious speech. Avoid speech that will create conflicts, but to promote speech that encourages harmony. Some people translate a speech precept number 7 to be avoid malicious speech. Malice is it means enmity of heart, hatred, or ill will. And of course, that comes from unskillful mental states. But this speech here the intention here is to avoid disunity, to avoid discord, and to avoid enmity, hatred. When a person who is engaged in malice, right, the intention is to destroy unity, to cause harm. So malice is like evilness. This precept here sometimes translated as slander speech or backbiting, meaning you say things to cause disharmony, to cause disunity. In the sutra, the Buddha's teachings to Kunda, the silversmith, the Buddha says that when a person hears something at one place, he does not proclaim it elsewhere to bring about a quarrel between the parties. What he has heard here does not report there to bring about a quarrel between the parties. Meaning that when you hear something and you run to the other party and say, hey, that party over there says bad things about you. And then you go to the other party and say, hey, they said very nasty things about you. And so you are causing conflicts between these two parties, right? So the Buddha is saying, don't be going to the other parties and say things that will create conflicts, misunderstanding. So quarrels and disunity often deliberately stirred up by people who are telling of the other parties. It may be the truth, may not be the truth, but the purpose of the quarrels, disunity, is because people are saying things that cause misunderstanding. And usually without their present, meaning you say things that the other party is not here at the moment to clarify, right? When you say things about them to this party, they're not here to clarify what they said. So sometimes it is being taken out of context. And we see this in the news, especially as we get closer to political elections. Right? One party discredits the other parties. The other party discredits some other party, the enemies. So they say things here and it's causing confusion to the public. And even then they say things about each other, and then the two parties now are fighting. They're not focusing on what is good for the public, but now focusing on how they're going to win, right, the elections. And So when things are taken out of context, it will create misunderstanding. Therefore, so when we abstain from such crooked behavior, it helps to restore harmony. And harmony can be restored if others do not make matters worse with their tale bearing. So we don't say things that are untrue about the other party to this party, and then vice versa to cause misunderstanding. The seventh precept is not just mere abstentions from malicious speech, but we should take one step more to take positive delight in harmony. So it's not about avoiding malicious speech or slanderous speech, but to find joy in promoting harmony, right? Find joy in the harmonious speech. In other words, we should tell good things about other party, right? When we go to this party, we should say, hey, they complimented you, you've done a great job, you issue these policies that have been very helpful to the public, right? You have passed this law that has been very beneficial to this community. So, great work. You should continue to work for the good of the community, or good of the people. So when we think like that, it helps to encourage, motivate one another. So harmonizing speech transforms discord into harmony and raises harmony that already exists between people to an even higher level. When we say things like that, it helps to motivate. When we are complimented, say, oh, the things that we have done have been very helpful. It makes us want to do even more, work even harder to bring more benefits. In this speech here, we should, this speech number 7 is about preserving harmony. And that's in the 6 harmonies. 6 harmonies, 六合敬, 六hòa kính. So 6 harmonies. 6 là 6, 6 hòa kính. The first one is harmonious gathering, being harmonious, being harmoniously together, coming together, and they put aside their differences. They put aside their different backgrounds, and they cooperate for the better. And it's a famous story in China, Tam Quốc, Tam Quốc, the 3 kingdoms, San Guo. Back in China, right? China was divided, and the warlords there were 3 warlords that became very powerful, and they could not unite China because of their differences, and because of that brought death to like 1 million people, right? Because they could not come together, they kept on fighting. It resulted in 1 million people dying because of the war. And so when we come together, we form family. But it's not family, and there's different types of relations, either blood related or culturally related, right? And there's also spiritual relations. There are people who come together because of financial interest, or security interest, or even spiritual interest. But all of these here are not reliable. And they can lead to conflicts eventually. And we look at history, we have seen family feuds, family members fighting each other, right, over money. And we have seen civil wars taking place because of ideological differences. They see things differently. That's why there's civil war within a country. And we have seen also religious protest because of the differences in their way of seeing things. So even religion could not avoid conflicts. But there is one common interest that can not be broken. There is one common interest that will preserve harmony. And that is no self, vô ngã,无我. Right? If we all have this common interest of no self, then harmony will be preserved forever. Right? There will be no conflict. So when we have this part of this spiritual family, when we come together with a common goal of enlightenment, we are now become part of this spiritual family, the Sangha, Tangya, Tangdoang, right? Santuan, become this part of this spiritual family. And with the common goal of enlightenment, we come together as a spiritual family because we want to, right? Because we are inspired to be part of this spiritual family towards enlightenment with the common goal of no self. When we're part of the Mahayana, right? Đại thừa Phật giáo, Ta Cheng Phật giáo, Phật giáo Đại thừa, Mahayana, and so with that we have this commonality to help others, and that brings us together. We come together because we have a common goal of reaching enlightenment and helping others. And because of that common goal, that becomes strong and becomes united. Right? So that's the first harmony. The second harmony is conflict-free harmony in terms of verbal. The things that we say should bring harmony. Kindly words bring harmony. Because much of what we say exposes what's in our heart. And if we're not careful, we can do more harm with our words, right, than our physical actions. For example, when we say there's a master and we say don't trust him, he's very lazy, or he's unscrupulous, he cheats people. So when we say things like that, people will lose faith in that master, and it can bring more harm to the master. Right? We don't, even though we didn't punch him in the face, but because the things that we say could bring more harm to him, more hurt to him. Right? So we come together, we should have this verbal. It's conflict-free. I'm not saying there will not be conflict between people, but it should be resolved. It can be resolved. Right? People are willing to put their differences aside to work out the misunderstanding. Reconciliation. Okay. And the third is mental harmony. So this is physical, this is verbal speech, right? And this is mental. Have the same understanding brings harmony. We wish that those around us become better. The same view, same outlook, but the foundation has to be skillful to bring harmony. Because there are groups who have the same view, but it's not skillful, like terrorists, right? They come together, but it's not skillful. Therefore, there's no harmony. So it has to be harmony. The foundation has to be harmonious, has to be skillful, right? Has to be skillful. And Buddhism is founded on selflessness. So therefore, Buddhism is skillful. So the foundation is skillful, and that will bring true harmony. The fourth harmony is harmonious in precept upholding. And this is to follow established rules of organizations, of an organization, right? Avoiding disturbing the minds of others. And this is also practice of selflessness too, because you're putting the organization first. You follow the rules, so that is also a sign of selflessness. Okay. And the fifth is harmonious in views that we hold. So we should have open mind to minimize conflicts, and we should use criticisms as reflections, as reflection points and opportunities. When people criticize us, we should reflect why is it that people are criticizing us, and if we have mistakes, then we should correct those mistakes. And so this is not to impose. Harmonious inner views is to not impose our opinions on others. Some use briberies, threats, inducements as methods for religious conversions. But as Buddhists, we understand conditionality, and we know that we can only influence people and not forcing them, not controlling them. So the best way to convert others to Buddhism is to actually practice Buddhism, right? To display our joy, loving kindness in our hearts towards others. So we as Buddhists want others to walk with us towards the path of enlightenment. And it's a nice thing to have, but we should have our own foundation. Our faith should have our own foundation. Because if our foundation is dependent on the number of people walking with us, then we are on shaky ground. Our faith is not strong enough. And if they stop following us, then our faith will fall apart, right? So our faith should not be dependent on the number of people following us or going with us. We should be able to stand on our own, right? Our own foundation. So while we have these views, we don't influence others or force others to follow us. And should people join us, that should not have any bearing on our faith. Our faith should be independent, right? Does it make sense? The sixth and the last one here before we end is harmonious in sharing requisites. So this is not necessarily dividing assets equally or the requisites equally, but the purpose of sharing should be based on loving kindness and caring. Sharing based on performance and needs. Like you share something because of the needs and not because to give it equally. Because if you give equally, people who may not need it will have more than they need. So giving is very important in Buddhism. In fact, it's the foundation. And in fact, it is communication. Giving, 布施, bodhi, generosity. Giving or generosity is the unifications that is most basics of Buddhist virtues. And in giving, it helps to establish positive contact between people. It helps to create spiritual friendship, and it helps to form a spiritual community. So giving is not just cultivating merits for oneself, but it's about establishing a spiritual community. So when we think of giving, dana, bodhi, 布施, in a more utilitarian way, meaning you just give because people need it. You give to the poor, you give to the people. That's not what giving in Buddhism means. It's not just to give to the poor, the homeless. But we give gifts to people because we like them, because we want to form this affinity, yin, right? We want to form spiritual friendships with them. We want to create a spiritual community with them. Maybe not this lifetime, but perhaps in a future lifetime. We want to create this spiritual relationship, a friendship with them, this life or next life. So it's not just about giving because of to the homeless because of what they need, but we give because we want to. And of course, when we don't give in a calculating way, and we don't expect anything in return. So in true giving, it is completely natural and completely spontaneous. Spontaneous. It is completely spontaneous. So when you give someone a present, a gift, you give expressions to your special awareness to them. Right? You you give your positive feelings towards them, and you give your special concern towards them. Right? Our giving should have those things. And therefore, and giving is in fact a form of communication, because when you give somebody, you are communicating what is positive in your heart, right? You're expressing what is it that's in your heart. And so when you, in that expression is communication. So therefore, giving is communication. You just naturally feel like giving to one another, and you express that feeling by the giving of gifts. And so when we express our gratitude, our joy, our well-wishing in our heart, we are communicating with them, right? So giving is communication. All right, let's summarize what we have discussed. We talked about 2 precepts today, precepts number 6 and number 7. Precept number 6 is abstention from frivolous speech. And we should not only avoiding meaningless speech, but to practice and maintain meaningful speech. And the purpose of precept number 6 is to avoid confusion and misleading others, right? To avoid fake news, to avoid sending miscommunication, misinformation. So we should check our sources of information. Don't just read the headlines, but try to understand the full story and avoid proliferating in misinformation. Because if you get angry, you get all emotionally stirred up after reading an article, be careful. You could have been affected by fake news. Okay? If we surround ourselves with meaningful speech, life will become meaningful for us. Precept number 7 is abstention from slanderous speech or malicious speech or backbiting. Not only that, but to encourage and maintain harmony. Right? So we use the 6 harmonies as the basis to observe this precept, to pursue what is best for unity. And in this precept, one fundamental thing about preserving harmony is the spirit of giving. Where giving in Buddhism is more than just giving to the needy, to the homeless, but to build spiritual friendship, to create this spiritual community. Because when you give, you are expressing your gratitude, your joy, your well-wishing that's in your heart. And when you express what's in your heart, you are communicating to others. All right, we will pick up next time with the 8th precept, abstention from covetousness. All right, let's do merit dedication. If you could please join your palms together, we recite. May the merits and virtues accrue today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. If you could please rise, we bow to the Buddha 3 times to show our respect. First bow, second bow, and third bow. Amida.